Well, good evening and welcome to this meeting of the Standards and General Purposes Committee. Item 1 is apologies for absence. Do we have any apologies for absence? So we have Councillor Williams and Councillor Bush is his substitute. You're welcome. Any other apologies for absence? Caroline Holland has indicated that she will be joining this meeting, but she is also attending the Cabinet meeting, which is scheduled at the same time, and despite her best effort, she still hasn't mastered how to be in two places at once, so she intends to come here, and as a consequence we will rejig the agenda in order to accommodate her, but I'm sure you would like to have the benefit of her advice on the matters that we have in mind. Item 2 is declarations of pecuniary interest. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? Okay, item 3 is the minutes of the previous meeting. You have two sets of minutes, one from the 27th of February and another from the 15th of March. Are they agreed? Thank you. Was anyone here? Yes? Some of you were. Good. Excellent. Okay. Item 4 is the audit progress report. Suresh, would you like to join me up here so that people can see you? Yes, please. I think so. And then you won't have people sort of swinging around and getting a strain on their necks, their poor necks.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members of the committee. So the report that you have in front of you today is our progress report as opposed to the audit results report, which is what we originally planned to issue to this committee. It's a short progress report. Well, I'm hoping that it's pretty self-explanatory in terms of the status of the audit and the reasons why, but I will provide a summary and also a bit more context in terms of where we are with the audit. So I know there's quite a few new members to the committee, so just to sort of a bit of context. So this is the first year that the authority was required to prepare its accounts to a shorter timescale. So in previous years, the authority had to the end of June to prepare accounts. This year was the end of May. And the auditors had until the end of September in previous years to conclude their audit. This year it was the end of July. So that accelerated timetable, which we've known about for almost probably 2 years, we all recognised that was going to be a challenge to achieve in the first year. Particularly given last year, there were issues with the authority implementing the new ledger, which had a knock-on effect in terms of the audit, and we did meet the deadline just before the deadline last year, but it was a challenge, and there was a number of lessons learned that we took forward, and actually, in fairness, we have worked really well with the council, with officers, to rectify some of the issues from the prior year. But clearly that accelerated timetable meant that there really wasn't any room for any unplanned issues arising, and in fairness to the authority, we ourselves had challenges in terms of resources. So we were at 140 authorities across the country, and that shortened timescale for this first year has had an impact upon our resourcing, which I reflected in the report. But I think there's probably two key things I wanted to highlight in terms of why I won't be issuing an audited report tomorrow, which is the deadline. Firstly, we identified some significant issues with the way that the authority has valued its property, plant and equipment, particularly around its specialist assets. So schools, for example, is a specialist asset. As a result of our inquiries and our kind of work, the authority accepted that there were errors in the way that was calculated and has had to carry out a significant amount of work to go back over the last couple of years to then recalculate and revalue those assets in the balance sheet. I think today you might have presented some figures which are subject to audit still, but the authority has completed that big piece of work that it needed to carry out. That has obviously a knock-on effect in terms of the audit, in terms of the work that we would have done on property, plant and equipment has had to be delayed while we wait for that work to be completed. But more significantly, that issue has then flagged to us concerns around the rest of the work that the valuer has actually carried out. So our approach to looking at the valuation of your property, plant and equipment is to seek to place reliance upon your expert. So you've got to have an in-house valuer. We evaluate their objectivity, their competence each year, and through then the work that we do at the year end, we form a view on whether or not we can rely upon that work. Clearly, having identified these significant issues at the commencement of the audit, that has undermined our approach in terms of how do we place reliance upon that expert. Our response to that is that we have engaged our own expert. So we have within EY what's called EY Real Estate, so they are property valuers, and we have now engaged them to carry out some specialist work in terms of providing in effect a second view on the work of your expert, your valuer. That work, now that you've completed your own work, will be commencing in due course, but clearly that means that that work is not ready for tomorrow's deadline. The second thing that has impacted upon the audit is, so not only has there been those property, plant and equipment significant errors in the accounts, there are two other areas where firstly the authority itself flagged at an early stage that the way it accounts for recharges in its income and expenditure account was incorrect, and it's revised the statements and had to produce again some additional working papers to support those adjustments. And the initial audit accounts presented for audit did include a number of prior period adjustments which weren't actually prior period adjustments, and the authority had to go back and revise its statements in respect to those. So a combination of the significant issues around property, plant and equipment, other adjustments that have been made to the accounts already, has then required me to look back and think, how did I... So when we planned the audit, we set a level of materiality, and we then set a testing level, which is called performance materiality. At the planning stage, I set that at the highest level, because at that stage, I wasn't anticipating, I didn't think there would be significant material misstatements in your accounts. Clearly, having carried out the audit for the first 2 or 3 weeks, we've identified these material errors in your accounts, and I've gone back and reduced my materiality level down to 50%, which is the way the audit approach works within EY. So as a result of that, we've had to go back, recheck the number of items that we've tested against that lower level materiality. That has meant we've had to we've identified more work we need to do, and in effect we've had to go through the whole audit to see the impact of that lower level of materiality. So that clearly has impacted on our ability to complete the audit by the 31st of July. So those are the main issues really of why we're reporting today the audit is in progress. We have arranged for resources to be scheduled so we can carry out the audit during August, and I anticipate being able to complete the audit by the end of August and come back to the committee. I think in September you have with a completed audit results report of our findings. I'm happy to take questions now, Chair. I did also want to pick up on the value for money conclusion page. Do you want me to do that now? So I've got a page which summarises the value for money conclusion. In essence, the risk we identified at the planning stage, we've completed our work on, subject to some review that I need to do. That's looking likely to be an unqualified conclusion. But I have also reported on a matter that was raised to us by a member of the public around valuations in relation to the Ealing Church transaction, and I've reported there that based on the work that we carried out, we are satisfied the authority's approach is reasonable in respect to those valuations. So that I have nothing to report in terms of that value for money conclusion in respect of that transaction. As I said, happy to take questions.
Questions? John?
In reality, do you have to set that every year before you do the audit, or is that has to be set every year?
So yes, it's set each year as part of the audit planning, but it's also then revised as we go through the audit. Hence the reason why I'm now changing that materiality level.
think Roger doesn't want to ask a question, but presumably add some clarification to what we've already heard.
That's okay, Chair. Just very briefly, a couple of things.
Sorry, could you introduce yourself?
Yes, it's Roger Kershaw, Assistant Director Resources, so Caroline's number 2 in this matter. I think just a couple of points I'd make on that from what Suresh has said. One is, of course, the changes that they found, and I think it's very much the officer's view that it was the valuations work that's really sort of blown us off course. Had it not been for that, it's certainly the council's view, the officer's view, that we would have met the deadline, so that really has created a huge amount of work. That work we have, in effect, done. I appreciate that, from what Suresh is saying, there's further testing work to be done, and of course they have to check the adjustments that we've made. And we'll come round to this item a little bit later, but what you have in front of you are the adjustments we've made for all of those points and issues that have been picked up within the audit report Suresh has just introduced. But of course they do need to be subject to audit. So all the known changes we have been able to make thus far, but of course the audit may work on that, may raise further issues. The second point, Chair, if I may, just for clarification, you also have before you tonight the pensions fund accounts, which have been agreed by the pensions committee, and I'm not sure whether Suresh you are hanging around for that bit later on, in which case we can cover that when that agenda item comes up. Otherwise I'd have asked Suresh to comment on that as well at this stage, Chair.
I'd like to ask a question, because Suresh mentioned that the timetable for this whole process was changed this year for the first time. I'd like to know where that change came from, who introduced that change. I'd be interested to know whether you feel that I mean, you mentioned the number of local authorities that you have to audit, which is how many? 140 local authorities. So basically, as I understand it, the time that you have has been condensed, and as a consequence, you're expected to do all your checking and auditing in a shorter period of time. And if issues emerge, as they have on this occasion, then there simply isn't the time to, because you've already deployed your resources to other local authorities, I assume, to kind of put these things right. Whereas previously there would have been some time to resolve these issues and get this done. And my final question is, are there other local authorities that you work with who are in this similar situation?
Okay, I'll pick up most of those. So in terms of the deadlines, they're set by government, so as or CLG now, or is it MHCLG? So they changed the deadlines. I think the key driver was the whole government accounts. So your accounts get consolidated with all other local authorities and they get presented to Parliament as a set of UK government accounts. My understanding is they wanted that done before recess, hence the reason why they brought forward the deadline. So, in terms of the kind of the wider picture, so we're looking at about 10% of our local authority clients are going to miss the deadline, and I think that's probably going to be replicated. Other firms who carry out this work probably got maybe 5-10% as well. So you're not alone. I mean, the other question I've been asked as well is what's the impact? So unlike your tax return, you don't get charged interest every day on anything like that. You don't get any penalty in terms of financial penalty. You will be named in a report in the autumn by Public Sector Audit Appointments Limited. That really is as far as the implications are in terms of not publishing your accounts by the 31st of July. I'll cover your questions.
I think you have. The obvious question is, when this change was first mooted, did firms such as your own and others within the industry flag up to government the difficulties that would be created by this and ask them to reconsider the decision to bring this closure period forward?
So yes, we did. And I think actually a number of local authorities made the same argument to government.
Suresh, thank you for that. In terms of the PPE valuation, so in previous audits, what was slightly done differently this year that allowed EY to pick up that error, because obviously it is a significant material error, restatements have occurred, etc. And secondly, going forward, would we now be having to instruct this EY real estate expert to value our PPE based upon the issues that we found this year? Thank you.
Can I take those in reverse order? Just to clarify, we're not getting our guys to value your property. They are forming a view on the output of your valuer. So give us an expert view on your own expert. I know it sounds a bit silly, but that's what they're doing. And it depends really what we find when we actually do that work. If they find there's wholesale issues with what the valuer has done, then clearly we will need to think about how we get assurance. Well, you would need to think about how you get assurance next year, and then we would obviously respond in terms of if you retain the valuer that we found lots of issues with, then clearly we probably want to engage our own experts right from the start. In terms of what we do differently this year, so property, plant and equipment has been a real focus of the regulator of auditors in terms of, so we get reviewed by the Financial Reporting Council, and one of the big areas they look at is how did you get assurance on the valuation of property, plant and equipment at your clients. So our work programme has changed over the years, and this year the level of detail that we've asked clients in terms of assumptions, sensitivity analysis, everything that goes into your valuation has been far more detailed than it has in prior years.
Thank you, Chris. You said that we would be named in the report. We've been in the report with the reason as to why we are it's been delayed, our report was delayed, or we just been named as not being on time.
From memory, it's not a long report. I think it just lists you as not hitting the deadline. I don't think it gives any reason for that.
Can I ask another question?
Can I just come back and say, is that to our detriment or benefit? That's what I really want to know. Because it's not really nice to be put down as missed the deadline, but due to reasons that we had to go back into value.
So my experience where authorities have missed the deadline, because authorities have missed deadlines in the past, even when it was end of September, is being named in that report didn't really have any impact. The impact is really about the reasons why you have missed the deadline and whether or not that's indicative of any major weakness in your financial reporting arrangements. I think at the moment, given that it's largely around the property, plant and equipment, I don't think that we'll be reporting in September that there's a whole-scale weakness in your financial reporting arrangements.
My question relates to property, plant and equipment, and I'm wondering why there isn't guidance for how you actually set about the valuation, which is commonly applied, and therefore you don't have the scope for people to say your expert's got it wrong and our expert, because that could go on and on. Of course, we could get an expert to look at your expert's view of our expert, but why isn't there clear, unambiguous guidance telling local authorities the methodology to be used in this important aspect of concluding their accounts?
So there is guidance. I suppose you could argue that it's not detailed enough that every authority does it the same way, but there's guidance issued by, I think it's the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, RICS, as well as guidance from Civic in terms of the code that you have to follow to prepare your accounts. But even with that guidance, there remain elements of judgment, and often it's that judgment that can be quite wide-ranging in terms of the impact, in terms of what actually then is valued in your accounts. I think in this case, though, and officers can correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think it was a judgment. I think it was an error in terms of how the valuer had arrived at the valuation of these specialised assets, which is why the officers have been able to then, in effect, reperform what the value had done using the correct figures. That be right, Roger?
Excuse me, I can confirm that indeed it was an error, which is why we were able to rectify it reasonably quickly, but it did involve a huge amount of change to the accounts, which is why we've been up against the time deadline.
The person doing this work knows what the error is, and presumably will not be repeating this error, or will this person not be engaged again to undertake this work?
Jay, the person does know. I think he might have even pointed it out, if I remember rightly, at the start of the audit. But I think he might have pointed out his error when he found it when he was reviewing his papers in preparation for the audit. So no, he won't be repeating that mistake. I think members may recall that obviously I wasn't here at the time, but previously I think we outsourced the valuation to an organisation, and this was the product of the difficulties and challenges we had when we did outsource it, and we brought it in at some period, some years ago, and employed our own valuer. So obviously there's the reviews that need to be taken on the basis of that.
And the other thing that strikes me was the audit was quite late in the process. So, I mean, I'm responsible for my own organisation's accounts, and it kind of always grieves me if we get something wrong, but it's really important to learn lessons from it. And you know, the obvious thing to me is if you timetable the auditing earlier, then there is still time to correct errors that emerge. But my understanding was that the audit was programmed for so late in the day that there simply wasn't the time to do this because your guys were deployed on other assignments when this emerged. So can we have an assurance that next year it will be coming to us soon?
So the reason why we scheduled it at the end of the period in terms of that audit was because of the issues in the prior year. So we wanted to make sure that all those issues were resolved before we kind of came on site to carry out the audit. So I think clearly in hindsight it's a great thing that we would clearly have another couple of weeks. That might have made a difference, but I think the PE issue is still prevented us from issuing that by 31st of July. I think the other lesson I think we can learn for next year is, and we did do this to an extent, is try and do as much testing as we can as part of the interim audit. So we do work in sort of February, March time, which obviously then helps to reduce the amount of work we need to do at year end. And again, we did do that to an extent, but given where we came from the prior year, there's only so much we could do. So I think there'll be clear lessons learned for next year.
Any other questions? Yes.
In regards to the PPE valuation, are we able to have a review of the internal controls to ensure that internally within Merton Council the error doesn't reoccur?
Chair, I can answer that. Yes, absolutely. Internal controls will be reviewed, and the whole basis for which we do it will be reflected on. And clearly, as I said before, lessons have been and will be learned for the future. Because this is an area that is absolutely clear that the auditors will be returning to next year. And of course, we will want to make sure that everything we've done follows the due process and has the central governance and internal checks in that. Because we don't want to find ourselves in a similar position next year.
The paper, well, firstly, thank you for the update, it's pretty useful, but the paper highlights, say, an additional audit fee. When will that be decided and communicated?
So that is dependent on the extent of work that we need to carry out. So hopefully by the end of August, we will be in a position to quantify that, and that will be included in the report that we bring to the September meeting.
No more questions, then I think we'll just note the progress report, and then item 5 is the fee letters the council mentioned. I think that will be.
This is just very quick. So again, for new members, you are part of the national procurement for your external audit. So a body called Public Sector Audit Appointments, one of the issues that report we were talking about. They appoint your auditor, and for obviously they appointed EY for 18-19. They then set the fee. So the letter in front of you is the fee that they've set. You will see that fee has significantly reduced from the prior year. That's off the back of the procurement exercise that they ran. But that is the fee that we will be charging you from next year, subject to obviously any additional work that we are required to carry out.
Okay. Any questions? Okay, that's noted. We're going to defer consideration of item 6 until the director is able to attend. So we'll move straight on to item 7, which is the annual governance statement. Margaret, would you like to introduce that?
This is the annual government statements which actually supports the accounts of the council. We're required to review our governance arrangements.
Oh, could I just ask you to introduce yourself, because there are some new members here.
Sorry.
Some of us know you very well, others not.
I'm Margaret Connaughton, I'm the head of internal audit. Okay. So this is, as I say, a review of our governance arrangements, and it's required under the Accounts and Audit Regulations that we do this annually. And we follow the CIPA framework, which sets out 7 principles of good governance. Below each of these principles, they give details of what we should be doing to meet each of the principles. So in the council, what we do is we have a working group, a governance working group, which I've detailed on page 8. The officers that are on that group. So we have key officers that are part of that group, and this group meets throughout the year, and we discuss the governance arrangements within the council, and that builds up towards the review, the final review at the year end. So this report is detailing the arrangements for 17-18, and on each of the principles we detailed how the council met each of these principles, so that's outlined in the report. And it ranges from how we deal with residents to how we conduct ourselves on our code of conduct, transparency agenda, etc. So as I say, as these are done each year, we have provided an update on the actions that were on last year's annual government statement, which are included on page 27. There were 9 actions last year, so 4 of them we're satisfied that we've done enough to close those off, and the other 5 they're actions that are in progress. So we're going to keep an eye on those, and they roll forward onto going forward onto next year's plan on page 28 that details the ones that are going forward. As well as those, there are other ones that we look at which are below those, which would be looking up to make sure we have updated policies and we're keeping up to date with the requirements of the standard throughout the year. So there'll be sort of smaller things that we also build on our work plan. And that's it really. If anyone's got any questions?
Thank you. I do like a brief introduction. Elise. Sorry.
That's okay. So I just have a question about the GDPR action. So it says that there's still work to be done, and one of my questions was about how, as councils, we are data controllers. Is the council drafting a controller and is it controller and processor agreement? Because we are the controllers, but the council is the processor. So is there anything being drafted for that to make sure that we're compliant?
My understanding there is, I'm not sure whether since as a council we're processors and controllers as well, so we are looking through what the requirements are on each of those. So So I can let you know. Yeah.
Caroline, can you shed any light on that, or were you tuned into that question?
Sorry, I wasn't tuned in, but if you could repeat the question, sorry. Yes, so as council, we are controllers of our residents' data, yeah. And if a resident wanted us, if, for example, if they were to email us and ask for all the data that we had, we wouldn't necessarily be the process of that, that would be the council. So I understand that there's been an agreement between the controller and the processor, and is there going to be an agreement that drafted on that?
I certainly think so. All your privacy notices have been published for you. Was this the issue raised at the initial training?
Yeah.
Right, okay. I think there was some further work being done on that, and we'll get that clarification for you, just to find out for you. Yes, we'll follow up on that, sorry.
Can that be circulated to all members of this committee?
It would impact on everybody, so yes, that would be
Thank
considered. Yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions to Margaret? Ben?
Yes, I was wondering, you've got here in progress the DBS checking process and a full review of that. I was wondering how often that happens in the council, and it says Kingston who will complete this. I know it's in a partnership with others. Does that depend on them, and how often do we do the DBS checks as a review of all of our staff?
This review has been requested as part of an internal audit review, so it's sort of a follow-up on some of the actions that we've recommended. So we asked them to do a full review. So I presume it's something that's done regularly. I don't know, Caroline's more.
So we do DBS checks every 3 years, and depending on the role, there are either normal DBS checks or we can do extended DBS checks depending on the level of involvement in vulnerable groups. And that's part of what the audit was looking at, to make sure that they are done regularly and flagged up for staff who have been in post, and also then for new staff when they start, that what is done.
Thank you. Brenda?
Thank you, Chair. On page 27, I'm not sure who's answering this one. Sickness, it says that complete, yet it has only fallen to the level that the council expect. What is the present level, please?
It's still higher than our target is, and we are working to redress it still. So I think it is under 9.5 days, but still below our target, which was 8.
Thank you, Chair. On page 28, new financial system to be reviewed. Could you just give us a little indication of when and how long it will take to be done? Is there further work to be done? When will it be done, please? Do you know? And what?
Chair, we're in the process of reviewing our internal controls. In fact, with the new financial system, those are constantly under review. And so it is a work in progress, and as new elements of the financial system are rolled out, those controls are reviewed. So I would say this is an ongoing piece of work and will be constantly under our scrutiny.
Be here so quickly. We're delighted to see that the cabinet is conducting. Have they finished? They have finished. I think it's probably they're going off on their summer holidays, and so we're delighted to see that they're conducting their business in such a business-like manner, and we welcome you here. So we'll go straight on to the audited final accounts, and I would like to ask you to introduce them, and presumably Suresh Suresh, who may have some comments to make, and Roger also. So, but we'll start with you, Caroline.
Thank you, Chair. So first of all, I'd like to start with an apology that we don't actually have the final set of accounts that will be going to the external auditor to be audited. What we have sent out and circulated on Friday was the situation as far as we have got to, and what we have circulated for you this evening are the core statements which have all of the adjustments we are currently aware of. So we did encounter in particular an issue with our valuation of the major part of our assets, which are called those assets which are done on a depreciated replacement cost. So it's mainly our schools, some of our other buildings that there isn't really no other use for, but we do it on that basis. So the auditor found an error in the way we value those. That error went back to 2015-16, which meant that we then have had to redo 15-16, 16-17, and effectively the 17-18 balance sheet. But hopefully what you can see from the core statements that we have circulated in front of you, the major changes to our balance sheet in particular is just an increase in our overall property, plant and equipment, and an increase in our unusable reserves. Unfortunately, for a local authority, some of the issues around the assets doesn't necessarily give us any more money. So people thinking, oh my God, that means I can now help solve the budget gap by having an increase in the valuation of our assets. It doesn't help us in that way at all. There have also been adjustments to depreciation through the years as a result of those changes, and there were some other areas which have been identified in relation to our pension valuation statements, and then also some prior period adjustments which we had made which didn't need to be made. So if you had seen on our website where we published the draft accounts, there are some changes, and then we have circulated in front of you tonight all the changes that we now know of. Suresh has detailed in his year-end report, which was part of the papers which came out on, it was Thursday they came out, that he's been unable to conclude his audit as a result of that, and indeed may need to do some further work. So we are working with Suresh and his colleagues to have that information available as much as possible. And I suppose, I'm just trying to see if David was here, just to draw attention to the fact that the usable reserves, the general fund balances have not changed as a result of the adjustments that have been made between when we did prepare the draft accounts and what we are now calling our final accounts. We have put a notice onto our website saying that the final accounts will not be audited as per the increased timetable. So the timetable was brought forward for members who are not aware from the 30th of September to the 31st of July. So we are not able to publish our accounts, and we've put a statement onto our website to that effect. Suresh will go into more detail as to when he thinks he will have the work finished. But we're sort of committed to working closely with him to enable us to be able to do that as soon as practically as possible. There are some other authorities in the country who are also experiencing this situation. So I'm aware of Luton, Greater Manchester and Warrington are also having some difficulties with preparation of the audited final statements. Whether there are any other boroughs in London, we're not aware. But certainly we are making representations back to the Public Sector Appointments Committee to let them know that there are, I think, challenges for both local authorities in trying to produce the faster closing accounts, and I think also, to be fair, for the auditors, the resources they have available. Because not only are sort of the NHS audits needed to be done, there are apparently quite a few companies who are looking to change their year end from December to March, which will put even greater pressure on resources available within the auditors to deliver what needs to be done. Happy to take any questions on what's in front of you. We have also reproduced summary accounts as well, so again, the only one that changes within the summary accounts is the balance sheet within the set of papers we've circulated, and we've also circulated what we're calling the Note 19 summary, was an explanation of the error, and then you can see what it does actually mean, an overall increase in our balance sheet of 31.5 million, but as I've said, mainly on the plant, property and equipment, and then the unusable reserves, because that's where we have to take the balancing item to. But happy to take any questions, and we have some colleagues here depending on how detailed those questions are going to be, Chair.
Thank you, Caroline. We did have a discussion on the item for the audit progress report, and some of the issues that you've raised we've had questions on. One that came from me that I would like you to be aware of is it seems to me that we need to get the audit scheduled in for earlier next year if this timetable is to remain, so that if there are difficulties that emerge, there is still time to put it right. But I think there's a general recognition from the auditors and from our own staff that the timetable set by government was challenging, I think is the word. I begin to wonder whether it's kind of an example, somebody saying do this because I want it, as opposed to do this because this can be reasonably achieved given the resources available to complete the task.
But just to say, Chair, we also produce for information purposes. We don't necessarily have to provide it to you, but we produce a summary for the whole of government accounts, which I think gives some further information to you in a different way. And part of the reason for bringing forward the audited accounts was to then have the whole of government accounts available quicker. But now central government, certainly ministers and MPs, are in their recess. So they won't be able to see, even if everybody had audited and had everything available for audit, no one's able to look at this, and they won't be back until September. So it is, in some ways, not quite irrelevant, but it doesn't help really anyone to have this. And certainly some of the discussions that we've already had with Suresh and his colleagues is, for those who weren't members of this committee previously, we had been flagged as red because of some of the issues with our new financial system when we were doing the audit last year. We made some significant progress and were put to amber, and we've sort of discussed, because of the issues that they have now found, are we therefore going to go back to red, and therefore it would make sense, if we can, to schedule the audit earlier, just to make sure for next year that we can get through with a clean bill of health next time.
And I think the other question that members were seeking reassurance on is that lessons in terms of valuations have been learned and that this issue will not recur.
Well, certainly there's quite a few lessons to be learned, not just on valuations, but certainly we're picking that up. But Suresh has also commissioned some further work from which there could be even further lessons. So it will be a very much an iterative process and feeding that back in. And I know that certainly last year we had updates on what we were doing with regards to the final accounts, and it might be that certainly at the next meeting we have a further update for you on what we've done and what lessons we've learned and how we're going to put those into practice. And I suppose I would also like to draw your attention to the fact that we've got the pensions annual report, and we do have an audit statement, so we have got one part of our accounts signed off by the auditors subject to the overall audit, because there needs to be some consistency with the statements, and because the auditors haven't checked the consistency approach, but certainly the feedback from the pensions fund panel was that they were happy with the accounts and actually found that it was, I think, a smoother process than has been in previous years. So we certainly made progress in one area, it's just unable to reflect it across the board.
Thank you. Any questions, Director? Okay.
Caroline, sorry, in terms of the pension account, so is that going to be signed off by the deadline? No, that's not.
Yeah, so...
signed by the devil.
Can I just clarify? Yeah, so because they are part of your main account as such, then part of that opinion on the pension fund is about the consistency with those main accounts, and obviously, because we haven't given an opinion on the main accounts, we can't then complete that consistency. Technically, we probably could, but I'd have to jump through so many hoops in terms of group authorisation process that I thought. And it doesn't count in terms of being named. You won't be named as a pension fund and a main account, it'll just be one name in that report. But I should say, as Caroline said, the pension fund audit actually went really, the date report is early July. I think we were finished by the end of June. That one we did start early, and I think you brought in a new pension fund manager, finance manager, and she's been fantastic in terms of helping us with the audit, and that's gone really smooth. So I think it's probably lessons learned from the pension fund that we could incorporate into the main audit. So yeah, that will be a clean opinion.
Any other questions? John?
Question on reserves. The use of
I'm doing this on behalf of David Williams.
the use of reserves are done by 5.6 million. Would you give us an idea what this money was spent on? Or is that you can? Page 7. I'm looking at the right. Okay, page 7. Reserves.
7 of which paper?
Yes, I don't know. That's the wrong. I don't think so. I'm using this. Yeah.
Certainly, the capital receipts reserve, we used the 7.4 million to fund our capital programme. The schools used some of their balances, and so you can see we have no control over how they use those balances, but we do show them. The earmarked revenue reserves would have been money from our outstanding council programme board, some of our economic development strategy, and some of our apprentice monies. So some of those reserves. So if you then actually look on page 56, you will see the net transfer of some of those, certainly the earmarked reserves, of what we used. And I suppose we also found, we show the capital grants that we've got in and not yet applied, but the Department of Health and Department of Education appear to be having not quite a clearance sale, but sort of in March there was lots of monies coming out, which were then for us to spend in 18-19. So we just wanted to draw to your attention the fact that we had been spending some of our capital grants, but then we got a lot in that we didn't expect and we can't use till this financial year.
Did you have a question?
Thank you, Chair. Can I just ask with regards to the pension fund? It's been asked a number of times, and seems to be coming up again and again, about investing in, or not investing any further in oily things called fossil fuels. Thank you. Yes, could I ask just whether there were any plans to stop investing in fossil fuels, although I do understand you have a duty to make the most money for the pension pot. It does seem to crop up time and time again from some of our more eco-friendly constituents.
Yeah, I can answer that. It's worth reminding, I am aware of the issue, and clearly the history in terms of Merton having quite a large amount of tracker investments which really follow the FTSE index, and of course if there are organisations within that have a carbon footprint, then you still have to follow the tracker. The new strategy that was agreed by the Pensions Committee last year, which we are actively pursuing now, investing in, and are well over half the way through in terms of implementing, has a much lower carbon footprint. In fact, we're going to be one of the lowest of our comparators, and so we are very much working towards that state. And whereas some of you may be aware, we're also having to move our money into the pool, into the London pool, which is the collective investment vehicle. They have actually got some very low carbon or no carbon funds, and we're investing in those as well. So we're going to move to a very low carbon footprint, but I cannot guarantee we'll be absolutely carbon free. Not sure what the issue around plastics might be as well when we move on to that agenda, but in terms of the carbon element, we'll be very, very low, but we won't be zero.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes.
The pension fund audit report highlights that the pension board didn't meet in the year of audit. What's the reason for that?
Yes, this is, I suppose if I could define the pension board, it's almost like a scrutiny type effect. So for members, new members will be aware of obviously scrutiny arrangements. And so it's an overseeing vehicle, and it's comparatively new within the local government framework. And it's fair to say that us, along with many other councils, have had some real challenges in putting those panels together and to an effective way. And we haven't fulfilled the overall and early requirements of that. We're putting a lot more activity into making sure we have active members and also training and a clearer understanding of their role within that. So we've got some work to do on that, along with many other councils, and we're actively engaged in that.
Any other
yes,
questions?
we had a meeting of it last week, and and so we've got a training program aligned with that, because a lot of it is understanding the role, bearing in mind it has that sort of scrutiny role rather than making active decisions.
Any other questions? Okay, well I think what we need to do at this stage is just to note where we are. We've had a detailed report and explanation. We've had the opportunity to question officers and the auditors, so we'll note the progress and we look forward to actually getting this all wrapped up and completed at the September meeting. Okay. We have dealt with item 6, we've dealt with item 7, we'll now go back to Margaret for the internal audit annual report. Margaret.
Thank you, Chair. This is the report on the work of, which summarises the internal audit work for 17-18, and it helps to form a view on the adequacy and effectiveness of the internal control environment, which supports the annual government statement. I come to committee in March and set a plan going forward for the year, so this is now summarising the work that's taken place. Some of the audits may change throughout the year, but what I do try and do is have a coverage of key areas within the council's financial systems, IT audits, service-specific audits and procurement. So this report sort of summarises the work that we've undertaken in those areas. On each of the audit reviews that we undertake, we give a level of assurance on those reviews. And where we have ones where we think a bit more significant actions need to be taken, we will call those a limited assurance audit. So last year we had 9 of those. As this summarises the work for the year, some of the audits that we undertook earlier in the year now, all the actions that were agreed with managers and heads of service are now been implemented. Some of the audits that have been undertaken later in the year, the actions are now in progress to be implemented, and we always follow up to make sure we look at evidence of that. Sometimes we may go back and do another full review. This report also gives you details of the work that we've undertaken in relation to fraud investigations. The council belongs to fraud partnership as with the audit partnership. Sorry, I didn't explain that. There's 5 boroughs are in the audit and fraud partnership. So it's Merton, Sutton, Kingston, Richmond and Wandsworth are part of this partnership. I've summarised the work of the fraud partnership on page 41. This details the work that's been undertaken on external frauds and on internal frauds. The council also take part in the National Fraud Initiative, and I'll give you an update of the work that was undertaken this year. We're also, going back to the internal audit element, we're required to do a review each year of our effectiveness, and that's been like an internal review. Every 5 years we have to do an external review undertaken. So we've just had one undertaken, so we've only actually received verbal feedback at the moment, which was very positive. Unfortunately, the report didn't come through in time for this committee, but I will report that up at the next one, the outcome of that review. But if anyone's got any questions.
Thank you. Omar.
Thank you. On table 3, financial systems, three of the financial systems, cash and bank, debtors and council tax had been reviewed or audited, and in the prior year they had been. Do we know why?
With the financial systems, we actually undertake them over a 3-year rolling programme, so you don't do all the financial areas every year. We wouldn't have the time to do that, so we would focus on ones we're aware there's maybe increased risks, or if we've got a new financial system in, we'd look at the general ledger, for instance. But we do make sure that we've completed them at least once in the 3 years, if not twice, if it's significant.
How is the risk assessed when deciding whether to audit them or not?
If they've, as I mentioned, if there's a new system that's coming, that would trigger a review that would need to be undertaken. If there's any control weaknesses that maybe we've become aware of, we may trigger a review to be undertaken earlier. It might be various factors that might feed into our risk assessment. Or if we're aware, maybe within our partnership, we may be aware of issues in another borough that might trigger work that we need to undertake. We want assurance in our borough that it's not going to happen as well. If there's been a fraud in another borough, it may trigger an audit for us to do as well. So.
Any other questions? Ben.
Hello. In Appendix B on page 48, goes into a bit of detail about the school meals audit, and that the supplier, the contractor, has not implemented an assurance framework of their own. And the outstanding actions there would be there isn't a monitoring system of their own. Do we have an update on that and when that will be implemented?
This audit actually was still at draft when it went up. It's only just getting into the final stage now. So it actually went up a bit earlier than maybe it hadn't got full agreement. On that one, I was just going to mention the update on the amount of money that was due. We know that's been received now, so that's been an update. On the monitoring, the comments they're providing on the report seems to be showing that there is some improvement being made recently, so we will be following that up and making sure that's robust.
And that final report that's the September review.
John.
Page 37. 2. Now you say there in your paragraph 3.6 that the same areas are not audited every year. And it's a like-for-like comparison cannot be made. Of course, that's when we look at the table, it's very difficult for us to understand what's going on here. It's a limited assurance. You only on the corporate services, you audit only one year in 2017-18, is that right? And just 7% assurance was given. Give me a little bit more explanation on that. It's difficult to compare.
There's actually 15 audits done in corporate services, and that table is just showing you that one of those audits were limited.
Yeah. Well, of course, it's not the same year as we audit every year. So, comparing not comparing like it's difficult for us to judgment of audit.
It's difficult because they are all different audits, but it gives you a feel, I think, for whether the limited assurances are which way it's going. I think that's why I tried to do over 3 years, so you can actually see there's been an improvement on the there's been a reduction on the number of limited assurances over the 3 years, but they are different audits.
Would you like to add to that?
Yes, Chair. Just on that specific one, it was actually on pensions investments, and just to answer that specific point, and it really was a throwback to the sort of the legacy of issues that we'd had experienced before, and it was around evidence of completeness of recoverable tax and independent valuation of assets held with fund managers. But that was a report around the 20th of December 17, and I can assure the committee that those actions have been implemented, and that I'm certain of a positive audit report on that.
Right, with a minute now. Fighting talk there. Agatha.
Page 39, 3.15, direct payment. You said that some of the direct payment documents on the website, available on the website, were out of date and required updating. Has it been done?
Yes, this is one of the audits that went out in August 17, so all the actions on that audit are now implemented. So it's in August. All the issues that we identified last year, they've now implemented. I can't really comment on whether we'd have to go back in and do another review now to see where they are at this point, but certainly they've implemented all the recommendations that we made at that point. So we would expect, that's improved.
Thank you, Chair. On page 38, 3.11, looking at school meals, it says schools meals contract week monitoring. Could you just explain why is that? Because it says again unpaid fees. So because it was week monitoring, the fees were not unpaid by providers. Can you just explain why, please?
At the time we did the review, we found that there was unpaid fees which have since been paid because we've had confirmation they've been paid. We're just waiting to finalise that report. The monitoring of the contract, it wasn't picking up some of the PIs, the KPIs that had been set, just thinking, sorry. I think it was just an issue with some of the PIs and the penalty notices that weren't being followed up at that point. As I say, we're still trying to finalise that audit.
Page 41, tendency fraud. Could you give a little bit more explanation as to what you're doing to minimise this, please?
So did you say tenancy fraud? So the full partnership would work with Merton.TV homes to undertake, they do some data matching to identify potential frauds and also receive referrals from the public which are investigated. That's the number of cases that come in. Some of those may be as a result of data matching as well as referrals. So that's and there also is publicity that I think goes out to let people, tenants know that these are investigated.
Are there any other questions on this report? So you've been asked to review and comment, and you have done so. So that recommendation has been concluded. So the next item is item 9, the anti-fraud and corruption strategy and whistleblowing policy update. Bit of a mouthful there. And Margaret, you're going to lead on this as well.
Thank you, Chair. Part of this, the remit of this policy is to look at, this committee is to look at fraud policies. The anti-fraud and corruption strategy hadn't been refreshed for a number of years, so we've done a review of that. And as part of that review, I've also included the prosecution policy, which wasn't previously on there. The actual changes on the policy are really only to make reference to the right term for this committee to tidy up the responsibilities in the table on page 69 to make it clearer, because there's some changes in the arrangements with the council that deals with different partnerships. And as I say, the appendix is the prosecution policy that's included. So the approach of the council really is to consider a prosecution in the case of all frauds that are housing, other frauds, staff frauds, and this paper outlines the approach that the council takes when deciding the public interest test that's undertaken to decide whether we go forward with the prosecution, but they would be considered under that. This paper also has got the whistleblowing policy. That was last updated in 2016. I think it's good practice to sort of refresh the policies and make sure they're up to date. We did a really thorough review in 2016 and compared it to the code, whistleblower code, and this review has found that the policy is robust. The only things that require changing were some of the contact details for the external contacts, the links to their websites and phone numbers have been updated. But otherwise there's no other changes there. But it's just to give it a refresh and it'll go back up on the internet.
Thank you, Margaret. Any questions on any of this? There's quite a lot here. Ben.
Hello. In the report, it mentions there is provision of training, anti-fraud training. Just wondering, does everyone get access to that in the council? How often is it taken up? If it's optional, do people not go to the training? Things like that.
We're currently rolling out online fraud training. We were rolling it out more regularly, and I don't think we've had it rolled out for 4 years, 5 years maybe. The director is supporting the rollout of the training, and it's encouraged. It's encouraged. More than encouraged. And as I say, that's an online training for all staff. That should be going out in the next couple of weeks. So that's something that we more than encourage staff to undertake.
Very way of knowing who's done it and who hasn't, and the actual take-up of staff in that training.
We will know, and we can run reports to say who's how many is completed and get those details, but it hasn't been rolled out yet, and we will be able to do those.
Any other questions on that? Well, I've got one that I've raised before, and it's in relation to whistleblowing, and that is, I'm aware that some local authorities have dealt with whistleblowing allegations by reaching compromise agreements with staff. In other words, they kind of buy them off and silence people. Can we get some assurance that that hasn't happened in the last 12 months? Caroline? Who would, presumably any kind of financial agreement would have to be mean, HR would be involved, but presumably a payment would have to be put through your department.
I suppose certainly would depend on the level, but I was just looking at page 84 of the supplementary one, because that's where the number of other departures which aren't compulsory redundancies. So that's mainly, I think, retirements. But what we could do is go back and just check. It's unlikely and certainly not something that we encourage, because we want to be open and transparent. If people whistleblow, then there's certainly an investigation. I'm clearly very mindful of that. So what we could do is come back to you and just do a check of those other departures, exit packages, just to confirm that for you.
I'd certainly welcome that. Any other questions? Right, well, thank you very much, Margaret, for that one. I asked to approve, to comment and approve, and I think we have done the commenting, so can we approve that? Thank you. So, we now move to item 10, which is the temporary contract staff upgrade. This is sorry, Carolyn.
Sorry, Chair, I was late in, so I don't know whether you've dealt with items 11 and 12, because it might make sense if you haven't dealt with those to do those first and then do item 10.
Yes, agree. So Fiona, item 11 would be complaints against members.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm Fiona Thompson. I'm Head of the Shared Legal Services Service. I'm Deputy Monitoring Officer. It's the practice for the Monitoring Officer to provide a verbal update as to whether any complaints have been received. Complaints against members for breach of the Code of Conduct, so whether there's been any since the last meeting. Since March, therefore, there's one complaint received. This has been disposed of. It was decided it didn't merit investigation nor any alternate course of action, and there are currently no ongoing complaints.
I think new members may be kind of perhaps interested to hear what our level of complaints against members is by comparison with other local authorities.
It's generally very low. We cover 5 of the neighbouring councils, and they're all quite low, to be honest. So I think we probably deal with 5, 6 a year. Very few get to the investigation side, so we might have 1 or 2 a year which get to investigation, but that would be a high number, I would say.
Is that 5 for Merton or across the shared service?
I would say 5 for Merton, but very few get to investigation.
Thank you. I think that Thank you for that. Item 12 is, again, Fiona's report on the appointment of an independent person.
Yes, so at the last committee, a report was presented about the recruitment process for the new independent person. The independent people take part in the complaints process. Merton has made a decision to have 2 such members. We currently have 1 as the second one's term expired this month. So the report went to committee last time about the recruitment process, and an advert went in April. Unfortunately, there were no applications received for that role. So the plan is to go and advertise again in September, try and enhance the profile on the website and do some tweaks as well to try and raise the level of the attention the advert gets. So it's quite disappointing, I'm afraid.
Thank you for that.
Should we go on to 14 and then go back to
Let's do that then. Item 13 is the work programme. Pages 91 to 92. There's a pretty full work programme, and there are certain items that we have to deal with at certain times of the year, as you will have noted from this evening's agenda. A course, there is always the flexibility to insert items or issues that should arise during the course of the year. Are there any questions on that, or can we agree that work programme? I take that as an agreed. Thank you. So that brings us back to item 10, which is the report on temporary contract staff, the update on that. This is a matter that is confidential, and therefore members of the public will be required to leave at this point.